Get her up, now. If she bleeds on the marble before the king arrives, I'll have your hide. Alpha Thorn hissed, his polished shoe digging into Lisa's ribs. Lisa couldn't breathe. Black spots danced across the crystal chandeliers. Her stomach had stopped cramping days ago. Now, there was only a hollow, echoing cold. 5 days without food. A forced purification for a theft she didn't commit. She's faking, her stepsister Clara snickered. Kick her again. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors groaned open. The ballroom's ambient chatter died instantly. The Alpha King had arrived. Lisa tried to stand, but her trembling knees gave out completely. As she crashed onto the icy floor, the last thing she saw was a pair of obsidian boots stepping into her fading line of sight. The cellar had smelled of damp earth and rust for so long that Lisa had forgotten the scent of the open sky. For 5 days, her world had been reduced to a 10-by-10 stone room beneath the Crescent Moon packhouse. There was a bucket for water, changed once a day by a silent guard, and a thin pallet on the floor. Nothing else. No bread, no meat, not even a handful of dried berries. Purification, Alpha Thorn had called it. The pack's winter silver reserves had gone missing from the vault. Clara, Thorn's biological daughter, had conveniently found a single silver-dusted leather glove beneath Lisa's bed. That was all it took. There was no trial, no opportunity for a defense. Lisa, the orphaned daughter of the pack's former beta, was a political inconvenience Thorn had been waiting for an excuse to discard. On the first day of her starvation, Lisa had paced, fueled by righteous, burning anger. She had screamed herself hoarse at the heavy iron door, demanding a council hearing. By the 3rd day, the anger had burned out, replaced by a violent, twisting agony in her gut as her body began to consume itself. By the 5th day, today, there was only a profound, floating numbness. The scrape of the iron deadbolt echoing through the dark made Lisa's heavy eyelids flutter. The door swung inward, framing the silhouette of Clara against the harsh, yellow hallway light. "Get up," Clara commanded, her voice dripping with practiced disdain. "You stink of dirt and failure. It's time for the mating ball." Lisa pressed her palms against the freezing stone floor. Her muscles trembled, weak and stringy. It took her 3 attempts to push herself onto her hands and knees, her breath hitching in her dry throat. "Why am I going?" Lisa rasped, her voice sounding like dry leaves crushed underfoot. "Thorn plans to banish me tomorrow. Why parade me tonight?" Clara stepped into the cell, a cruel smile playing on her lips. She tossed a bundle of dark green fabric onto the floor. "Because the Alpha King demands that every unwed female of age attend. If Thorn leaves you behind, it draws the king's questions. Besides," Clara's smile sharpened into a knife edge, "my father wants the king to see what happens to thieves. He wants everyone to see you as you are, withered, broken, and unchosen. When no Alpha steps forward for you tonight, your banishment tomorrow will be justified by the goddess herself." Lisa stared at the bundle. It was a gown, but not a new one. It was an old dress of Clara's, tailored to fit a healthy, vibrant wolf. On Lisa's current emaciated frame, it would hang like a shroud, emphasizing every sharp angle of her collarbones, the hollows of her cheeks, and the fragility of her wrists. "Wash in the courtyard trough?" Clara sneered, turning on her heel. "You have 20 minutes before the carriages leave." The water in the trough was crusted with morning ice. Lisa broke it with a numb fist. As the freezing water shocked her system, she didn't cry. She scrubbed the cellar dirt from her skin, her mind retreating into a quiet, heavily fortified room within herself. She knew the logic of her pack. Strength was currency. To show weakness was to invite slaughter. Thorn and Clara expected her to crawl into the king's banquet hall and beg for scraps, or to weep in the corner, proving her inherent guilt and unworthiness. I will not give them the satisfaction, Lisa thought, shivering violently as she pulled the emerald green silk over her head. The fabric gaped at her chest and hung loosely around her waist. She had to pin it at the back with a rusty brooch just to keep it from slipping off her shoulders. Looking at her reflection in the dark, rippling water of the trough, she saw a ghost. Her skin was pallid, her lips bloodless, but her eyes, a startling, clear amber, were alight with a quiet, desperate fire. She would attend this ball. She would stand. She would survive the night, accept her banishment tomorrow, and walk into the rogue territories with her head held high. She walked toward the waiting carriages, her steps slow, methodical, and burning with the last reserves of her willpower. She just had to stand tall for 3 hours. Just 3 hours. The royal citadel was a masterclass in intimidation. Built into the side of a jagged mountain, its towering spires of black basalt seemed to pierce the starless sky. Inside, the grand ballroom was a sea of excess. Massive crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light, reflecting off polished marble floors that looked like sheets of frozen glass. For Lisa, the ballroom was not beautiful. It was a torture chamber. The moment she stepped through the grand archways behind Thorn and Clara, a physical wave of scent hit her. Long banquet tables were piled high with roasted venison, glazed pheasants, towers of fresh fruit, and rich, spiced wine. The smell was so dense, so aggressively savory, that Lisa's stomach gave a single, violent lurch before her vision swam. She dug her fingernails into her own palms, using the sharp sting of pain to anchor herself to consciousness. "Stand in the back by the pillars," Thorn muttered under his breath, not looking at her as he smoothed his velvet lapels. "If you embarrass me, the banishment will be the least of your worries. I'll let the enforcers have you before you cross the border." Lisa didn't reply. She drifted toward the shadows of a massive fluted pillar, pressing her back against the cool stone to stay upright. The room was a blur of silk, diamonds, and predatory smiles. Every pack had brought their best and brightest, hoping to catch the eye of the Alpha King. King David was an enigma. He had ascended the throne 3 years ago after a brutal border war that had left his father dead. Rumors painted him as a ruthless tactician, a man composed of ice and iron, who had yet to take a mate because he found the entire political circus of the mating ball tedious. He didn't want a trophy. He wanted an equal. A sudden, heavy silence fell over the room. It was not a polite hush, but a visceral reaction to a shift in the air pressure. The dominant aura was so absolute, so suffocatingly heavy, that several weaker wolves in the room actually whimpered, their knees buckling slightly. The herald didn't even need to announce him. King David walked through the main doors. He was taller than any man in the room, broad-shouldered and lean, dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit without a single medal or ornament. He didn't need them. His power radiated off him in invisible, crushing waves. He had dark, neatly trimmed hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He didn't strut or growl like the lesser alphas. His movements were economical and grounded and terrifyingly silent. He began to walk the length of the room. The female wolves practically vibrated with anticipation, pushing forward, tilting their necks to bare their scent glands. Clara had positioned herself in the front row, a perfect picture of submissive beauty. Her perfume a suffocating cloud of roses and vanilla. David walked past her without breaking his stride. He didn't even blink. Lisa watched him from the shadows. She felt a strange, detached fascination. He looked tired. Behind the terrifying mask of the king, she saw the subtle tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes as he took in the fake smiles and political posturing. Then he stopped. He was 20 feet away from Clara, standing in the dead center of the ballroom. His head tilted just a fraction of an inch. His nostrils flared. Beneath the overwhelming stench of roasted meat, heavy perfumes, and desperate pheromones, King David had caught something else. It was faint, buried under layers of silk and shadows. It was the scent of pine needles, winter frost, and something metallic. The scent of a body consuming itself. The scent of pure, unadulterated survival. Slowly, deliberately, the king turned away from the prime candidates in the center of the room. He faced the dark corner where the fluted pillars stood. The crowd parted instantly, leaving a clear, empty path between the Alpha King and the shadows. Lisa felt the weight of his gaze before she actually saw him looking at her. It was a physical pressure against her chest. He was staring directly at her, his stormy eyes locking onto her amber ones. "Don't look down," she told herself. "Don't show your neck." She held his gaze. For 3 seconds, time stopped. She poured every ounce of defiance she had left into that stare. She was broken, starved, and framed. But she would not bow to a tyrant who presided over a system that allowed such cruelty. David took a step toward her. The air in the room grew instantly colder. Lisa tried to square her shoulders, to stand taller, but the sudden adrenaline spike was too much for her ruined system. The last thread of her endurance snapped. The room tilted violently sideways. The crystal chandeliers became streaks of blinding light. "Get her up. Now." Thorne's voice hissed from somewhere nearby, laced with sheer panic. "If she bleeds on the marble before the king arrives, I'll have your hide." But Lisa was already falling. She felt the impact of the icy floor against her hip and shoulder, heard Clara's distant, mocking snicker. She didn't see Thorne step forward to kick her out of the way. She only saw the blur of charcoal fabric and obsidian boots moving faster than a human eye could track. Before Thorne's shoe could connect with Lisa's ribs, a hand like a steel vice clamped around Thorne's throat, lifting the massive Alpha 2 feet into the air. Gasps erupted around the room. Lisa lay on the floor, her vision fading to black, the last thing she registered, before the darkness pulled her under entirely. Was the king kneeling beside her, the smell of rain and ozone enveloping her? And a deep, furious voice echoing through the silence. "If she stops breathing," King David whispered softly, a promise of absolute death, "every single member of her pack will join her." The sickening thud of Alpha Thorne hitting the marble floor broke the frozen tableau of the ballroom. King David had released him with a flick of his wrist, treating the massive pack leader like a piece of garbage he had grown tired of holding. Thorne gasped for air, scrambling backward, his hands clutching his bruised throat. David didn't look at him again. His entire focus was on the fragile, motionless form on the ice-cold floor. He dropped to his knees, heedless of the pristine charcoal trousers of his suit. The scent that had drawn him across the room, pine, frost, and desperate survival, was now overwhelmed by the terrifying, metallic tang of failing organs. Gently, with a reverence that shocked the watching nobility, the ruthless tactician king slipped his arms beneath Lisa's knees and shoulders. She weighed nothing. It was like lifting a bundle of hollow reeds wrapped in silk. As David stood, cradling her against his chest, a low, rumbling growl vibrated in his throat. It wasn't a conscious sound. It was the primal, uncontrolled fury of a wolf recognizing that what was his had been damaged. The sound echoed off the high-vaulted ceilings, causing every alpha, beta, and omega in the room to lower their eyes and expose their necks in instinctive submission. "Lock down the eastern wing," David commanded, his voice a lethal, quiet rasp that carried perfectly in the dead silence. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The Crescent Moon Pack will remain there under heavy guard. No one leaves. If this woman stops breathing, I will execute their alpha myself. Without waiting for a response from his stunned royal guard, David turned and carried Lisa out of the grand hall. The journey to the royal infirmary was a blur of sweeping corridors and panicked servants scrambling out of the king's path. He kicked open the double doors of the medical wing, roaring for Dr. Aris. For the next 4 hours, David paced the sterilized white hallway. He refused a chair. He refused the updates from his beta regarding the panicked whispers spreading through the citadel. He only stopped pacing when the heavy oak door to the trauma suite clicked open. Dr. Iris, an older wolf with graying temples and a perpetually calm demeanor, stepped out. He looked deeply shaken. "Status," David demanded, closing the distance between them in a single stride. "She is stable, sire," Aris replied, keeping his voice carefully measured. "But barely. Severe malnutrition. Extreme dehydration." The cold shock from the floor nearly stopped her heart. Her body has been cannibalizing its own muscle tissue for days. Whoever did this to her? The doctor trailed off, noting the murderous storm brewing in the king's gray eyes. "We have her on intravenous fluids and broad-spectrum nutrients. It will be a slow recovery. She cannot eat solid food yet. It would kill her. Will she wake?" "The sedative is light. She should regain consciousness soon." Aris hesitated. "My king, her physical condition is dire, but the psychological toll of such prolonged starvation—" "I will handle it," David said smoothly, his tone leaving no room for debate. He bypassed the doctor and pushed into the room. The infirmary suite was vast and quiet, dominated by the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. Lisa lay in the center of a massive plush bed, swallowed by the thick white blankets. The emerald gown had been replaced by a soft cotton hospital gown. Even in sleep, her brow was furrowed, her jaw clenched as if she were bracing for a blow. David pulled a steel chair to the edge of the bed and sat. He remained perfectly still, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. An hour passed before her eyelids fluttered. Lisa dragged herself out of the dark. The transition wasn't gentle. It was a sudden, terrifying realization that the air smelled wrong. It didn't smell like damp earth and rust. It smelled like rubbing alcohol, clean linen, and, faintly, the ozone scent of an approaching thunderstorm. Her eyes snapped open. Panic, sharp and metallic, tasted like blood in her mouth. She tried to sit up, but her limbs felt like they were encased in lead. A sharp tug on her left hand made her look down. Clear tubes were taped to her bruised skin. Poison. The thought flared in her mind. Thorn brought me here to quietly finish it. Her right hand shot out, her trembling fingers wrapping around the IV tube to rip it from her vein. Before she could pull, a large, impossibly warm hand closed gently but firmly over hers. Lisa flinched violently, expecting a strike, squeezing her eyes shut. Nothing happened. "Don't!" A deep voice rumbled, rough as velvet. "It's keeping you alive." Lisa slowly opened her eyes and turned her head. Sitting beside her, his broad shoulders dwarfing the chair, was the Alpha King. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal corded forearms. The terrifying mask he wore in the ballroom was absent, replaced by an expression of intense, quiet observation. She stared at him, her chest heaving. Where? Her voice failed, coming out as a dry, painful hiss. David leaned forward, picking up a small plastic cup of ice chips from the bedside table. He held a single chip out to her lips. You are in the Royal Citadel's medical wing. You are safe. Lisa didn't open her mouth. She looked from the ice chip to his stormy gray eyes, her amber gaze filled with profound, ingrained mistrust. David didn't force it. He simply waited, holding the ice steady. I am not Thorn, he said softly. I do not find honor in breaking those who cannot fight back. Eat the ice. Your throat is bleeding. The sheer logistical truth of his statement won. Lisa parted her cracked lips. The cold relief of the ice against her parched tongue was blinding. She closed her eyes, savoring the single drop of moisture as if it were a rare vintage. When she opened her eyes again, David was still watching her. Why? She whispered. Because, King David replied, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with a power that vibrated in Lisa's very bones. A king does not let a pack leader murder an innocent woman on his marble floors. Rest now. Tomorrow, you will tell me everything. The next morning, the winter sun filtered through the high, frosted windows of the Royal Infirmary. Lisa was propped up against a mountain of pillows, a small, steaming bowl of clear chicken broth resting on a tray over her lap. It was the first meal she had seen in 6 days. The aroma was agonizingly good, making her stomach cramp and her mouth water to the point of pain. Yet, she stared at it, her hands resting motionless on the white sheets. From the corner of the room, David watched her. He had been there since dawn, reading a leather-bound dossier, but his attention rarely wavered from her. If you eat it too fast, you will be sick, David said quietly, turning a page. A spoonful every 5 minutes, Dr. Eris's orders. Lisa picked up the silver spoon. Her hand shook so violently that the broth spilled before it reached her lips. A hot flush of shame crept up her neck. She hated this weakness. She hated being observed while she was this vulnerable. She put the spoon down with a quiet clatter, her jaw setting into a stubborn line. David sighed, setting his dossier aside. He stood, towering in the quiet room, and walked over to the bed. Without a word, he took the spoon, scooped a small amount of broth, and held it near her mouth. Lisa stiffened, pressing back into the pillows. I can feed myself. Your pride is intact, I see, David noted, a faint, genuine ghost of a smile touching the corners of his mouth. But your motor functions are compromised, open. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't a threat either. It was an undeniable fact. Grudgingly, she leaned forward and took the broth. The warm liquid hit her stomach like a jolt of electricity. She closed her eyes, letting out a long, shuddering breath. Dr. Eris informed me that you were subjected to a purification ritual, David said, his tone casual, though the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. 5 days in a lightless cellar. No food. 1 bucket of water. What was your crime, Lisa? Hearing her name on his lips sent a strange shiver down her spine. I didn't commit one, she rasped. Her voice was stronger today, the ice and fluids having done their work. Thorn disagrees. He claims you stole from the winter reserves. David offered her another spoonful. Lisa took it, swallowing carefully before meeting his gaze. The vault was robbed. Clara, Thorn's daughter, found a silver-dusted leather glove under my bed. They claimed it was mine. That was the extent of the trial. David paused, the spoon hovering over the bowl. He tilted his head, his stormy eyes narrowing in calculation. A silver-dusted glove. Yes, the winter reserves of the Crescent Moon Pack, David said slowly, his mind working with terrifying speed, are stored in solid, stamped ingots, kept in sealed, temperature-controlled titanium crates until the spring trade. Lisa frowned, confused by his sudden shift to logistics. I suppose so. No, solid ingots do not produce dust, David stated, his voice flat. Not unless they are being actively filed down, melted, or clipped to hide their serial stamps. He set the spoon back into the bowl. If there was silver dust on a glove, it wasn't from a theft of the reserves. It was from the laundering of them. Lisa stared at him, her mind racing to catch up. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Thorn, she breathed. The pack's finances have been poor for years. He was stealing from his own pack. And when the auditors or the elders started asking questions, David finished smoothly, his eyes turning cold and hard as flint. He needed a scapegoat. A convenient, politically isolated scapegoat who possessed no familial backing to demand a proper investigation. Lisa looked down at her hands, the bruised veins standing out against her pale skin. The sheer cruelty of it washed over her. She hadn't just been framed. She had been tortured to cover up their own rot. The numbness that had protected her in the cellar began to crack, replaced by a sudden, hot surge of betrayal. David watched the realization hit her. Noting the slight tremor in her shoulders and the way she clamped her jaw shut to keep from crying, he felt a violent urge to go to the eastern wing and tear Thorn limb from limb. Instead, he reached out, his large fingers lightly tracing the bruised skin on the back of her hand. The touch was electric, grounding her instantly. "Eat your broth, Lisa," David commanded softly, stepping back from the bed. He adjusted the cuffs of his dark shirt, his posture shifting from a caregiver to the lethal tactician who had won a border war. "I have some guests in the Eastern Wing who need to answer a few questions regarding their bookkeeping." Lisa looked up, a spark of her old, defiant fire returning to her amber eyes. "Be careful. Thorn is a liar, but he is cornered. Cornered wolves bite." David paused at the door, glancing back over his shoulder. The look in his eyes was so profoundly dominant, so utterly devoid of fear, that it took Lisa's breath away. "Let him try," the Alpha King whispered. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him, leaving Lisa alone with the rhythmic beep of the monitor and the dawning realization that the king of the realm was going to war for her. The eastern wing of the citadel was notoriously luxurious, designed to host visiting royalty. But to Alpha Thorn, pacing the length of the Persian rug in the sitting room, it felt like a polished cage. Outside the heavy mahogany doors stood 4 members of the royal guard, unmoving, unblinking, and armed with silver-tipped weaponry. "Stop pacing, Father. You're giving me a headache," Clara snapped from the velvet chaise lounge. She was furiously reapplying her lipstick, though her hand trembled slightly. "The king is just posturing. You are a sovereign alpha. He can't execute you over a starved orphan." Thorn stopped, glaring at his daughter. His neck still bore the dark, plum-colored bruises in the shape of the king's fingers. "You absolute fool," he hissed, his voice dropping to a panicked gravel. "Did you feel the aura in that room?" He wasn't posturing. He was inches away from snapping my spine. "We need to stick to the story. She stole the silver. We punished her according to ancient rites. That is all." The lock on the door clicked. The sound was soft, but to Thorn and Clara, it might as well have been a gunshot. The door swung open smoothly. King David stepped into the room. He was unaccompanied. He didn't bring his guards inside, didn't bring a beta to take notes. His absolute confidence was far more terrifying than a small army. He held a single, slim tablet in his left hand. "Sit," David commanded. It was not a request. Thorn's knees hit the sofa before his brain even processed the order. Clara froze, her lipstick hovering an inch from her mouth. David walked to the ornate fireplace, standing beneath a massive portrait of his late father. He tapped the screen of his tablet once, his stormy eyes fixed entirely on Thorn. "I am a reasonable man, Thorn," David began, his voice devoid of the booming anger he had displayed in the ballroom. This tone was worse. It was the calm of a surgeon about to make an incision. "I respect pack autonomy. I respect the right of an alpha to govern his people. But I do not respect a liar, and I abhor a parasite." Thorn opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words died in his throat as David raised a single finger. 3 hours ago, I dispatched a team of royal auditors to the Crescent Moon territory, David stated smoothly. "Under the decree of a royal investigation, they opened your vault. Or rather, what was left of it." Thorn went chalk white. Clara let out a small, terrified squeak. "I have the preliminary report here," David continued, reading from the screen. "Your winter reserves are depleted by 60%. And yet, there is no record of trade, no famine, and no infrastructure improvements to account for such a deficit. What the auditors did find, however, were metal shavings deep in the floorboards and chemical residue consistent with a makeshift smelting operation." David looked up, his gaze pinning Thorn like a butterfly to a board. "You were shaving the ingots, melting the clippings down into untraceable coins, and funneling the wealth into offshore accounts to cover your gambling debts in the human territories." "My king, this is madness," Thorn stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Lisa had the silver dust on her glove. She is the thief. She confessed to nothing." David cut him off, his voice finally cracking like a whip. "You locked her in a cellar for 5 days without food or water to silence her. You needed a scapegoat. You chose the orphaned daughter of your predecessor because she had no family to demand justice." "No!" Clara suddenly cried out, scrambling off the chaise lounge and dropping to her knees. She crawled toward the king, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, letting the neckline of her dress slip. "Please, Your Majesty. I didn't know. My father forced me to plant the glove. I was terrified of him. I am a victim, too." Thorn stared at his daughter, utter betrayal flashing across his face. David looked down at Clara. There was no pity in his eyes, only profound disgust. "A wolf who turns her throat to save her own skin while throwing her blood to the wolves has no place in my court," David said softly. He stepped around her as if she were a spill on the floor. He stopped directly in front of Thorn. "The winter reserves of the Crescent Moon Pack are subsidized by the Crown," David said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You did not just steal from your people, Thorn. You stole from me." "Mercy," Thorn choked out, lowering his head. "You showed none to the woman bleeding on my marble floor," David replied. "You are stripped of your alpha title, effective immediately. You and your daughter will be transferred to the basalt prisons beneath the mountain to await trial for high treason and embezzlement." David turned on his heel and walked toward the door. "Guards," the king called out. "Take out the trash." The moon was high and bright by the time Lisa managed to swing her legs over the edge of the infirmary bed. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Her joints felt like they were filled with crushed glass, and a wave of nausea washed over her. She gripped the metal bedrail, waiting for the room to stop spinning. The IV had been removed hours ago, replaced by a strict schedule of nutrient-dense broths and water. But she still felt hollow. She hated this bed. She hated being prone. Surviving Thorne's regime had taught her that lying down when you were wounded was an invitation for a killing strike. With agonizing slowness, she pushed herself to her feet. She leaned heavily against the wall, shuffling step by step toward the massive arched window at the far end of the suite. The glass was cold against her forehead. Outside, a heavy snow was falling, blanketing the jagged peaks of the Citadel Mountain in pristine white. It was beautiful, but terrifyingly vast. She was hundreds of miles from the only home she had ever known, entirely at the mercy of a king she barely understood. "You should be resting." Lisa gasped, spinning around so fast she nearly lost her footing. King David was standing in the doorway. He had shed his suit jacket and tie, the top buttons of his crisp white shirt undone, looking less like a monarch and more like a weary warrior returning from a long campaign. He didn't rush forward to catch her, sensing instinctively that she would hate being coddled. Instead, he walked slowly to a plush armchair near the window and sat down, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "I don't like cages," Lisa breathed, her arms wrapped defensively around her midsection, even gilded ones. David watched her, his stormy eyes reflecting the moonlight. "It is a hospital room, Lisa, not a cell. The door is unlocked." Lisa looked away, staring back out at the snow. What happened to Thorne? He is currently residing in a very deep, very cold, very locked cell beneath our feet. David replied smoothly. "Along with Clara, they will face a royal tribunal next week for treason, embezzlement, and attempted murder." Lisa's breath hitched. She closed her eyes as a massive, crushing weight suddenly lifted from her chest. It was over. The nightmare of the last 5 years, the constant fear of stepping out of line, the starvation. It was finally over. A single tear escaped, cutting a hot track down her pale cheek. She dashed it away furiously with the back of her hand. David stood up. He closed the distance between them, stopping just a foot away. Close enough that she could smell that intoxicating scent of rain, ozone, and sheer masculine power. "Do not hide your tears from me," David said quietly. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated through her ribs. "You survived an ordeal that would have broken hardened warriors. Your tears are a testament to your endurance, not a sign of weakness." Lisa looked up at him, her amber eyes searching his face for a trap. She found none, only a steady, burning intensity. "What happens to me now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Thorne is gone. I have no alpha. I have no pack. By our laws, I am a rogue." "You are no rogue," David said instantly, his jaw tightening. He reached out. This time, Lisa didn't flinch. His large, warm hand cupped the side of her face, his thumb gently wiping away a second stray tear. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight down her spine, making her breath catch in her throat. Her wolf, dormant and starved for days, suddenly stirred, letting out a soft, pleased purr at the contact. David's pupils dilated, swallowing the gray of his irises until they were almost entirely black. He felt it too. The crackling, undeniable pull of the mating bond. He had felt it the moment he caught her scent in the ballroom. But here, in the quiet of the night, it was a roar in his blood. "My father." David began softly, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Was betrayed by his most trusted beta. I watched a man I called uncle drive a blade into my father's back for a chest of gold. I learned early that titles and bloodlines mean nothing without honor. He stepped closer, his body radiating a heat that drove the chill of the window away. I saw how you looked at me in the ballroom, Lisa, David whispered, his face inches from hers. You were dying. You had nothing left. But you looked at me not with fear and not with submission. You looked at me with pure, unyielding defiance. You judged me. Lisa swallowed hard, trapped in his gaze. I thought you were just another tyrant. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I can be, when the situation demands it. But not with you. His hand slid into her hair, cradling the back of her head, anchoring her to him. You are under the king's protection now. You will stay here in the citadel. You will heal. You will eat. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her temple. The sensation made Lisa's knees weak, but this time, it had nothing to do with starvation. And when you are strong enough, the Alpha King murmured into her hair, we are going to have a very long conversation about the future. Werewolf healing was a miraculous thing, provided the body had fuel. Over the next 3 days, Lisa's recovery was exponential. The hollows of her cheeks filled in, the bruised purple shadows beneath her amber eyes faded to a healthy gold, and the brittle weakness in her bones was replaced by the familiar, thrumming energy of her dormant wolf waking up. On the evening of the 4th day, Dr. Aris entered her suite with a wide smile and a single nod. You are cleared for solid food, my lady, the doctor announced, checking her vitals one last time. But the king left strict instructions. Your first meal is not to be served here. Before Lisa could ask what he meant, the heavy doors opened. King David stood in the threshold. He wore a simple black sweater and dark trousers, looking relaxed, though the magnetic pull of his presence was as overwhelming as ever. Come, he said simply, holding out his hand. Lisa hesitated, then slid out of the infirmary bed. She was dressed in a soft, cream-colored silk tunic and leggings the nursing staff had provided. Her bare feet made no sound on the floor as she walked toward him. She didn't take his hand. She wasn't quite ready for the electric shock of his skin against hers. But she followed him into the corridor. David led her up a private spiral staircase, away from the clinical whites of the medical wing and into the royal residential quarters. The air here was heavy with his scent: rain, ozone, and cedarwood. He opened a set of double oak doors, ushering her into his private dining room. A roaring fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the space. In the center of the room was a heavy mahogany table, and upon it sat a feast that made Lisa's knees instantly weak. Roasted pheasant dripping with pan juices, thick cuts of prime beef seared perfectly rare, mounds of roasted root vegetables, and warm, crusty bread. Her wolf let out a primal, desperate whine in her mind. Her mouth watered so fiercely it actually ached. David pulled out a heavy wooden chair for her. Sit. Lisa practically fell into the chair, her hands trembling as she gripped the edges of the table. She wanted to tear into the meat with her bare hands, to gorge herself until she couldn't breathe. It was a terrifying, feral urge born of starvation. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting it. I can't, she whispered, her knuckles turning white. If I start, I won't stop. I'll make myself sick. David knelt beside her chair. He didn't mock her struggle. His eyes held only a profound, protective understanding. Look at me, Lisa. he commanded softly. She opened her eyes, meeting his stormy gaze. "You are not a starving prisoner anymore," he said, his voice a low, grounding rumble. "You are safe. The food will never run out. I will feed you myself if I have to." He reached up, picking up a silver fork and a sharp knife from the table. With slow, deliberate movements, he carved a small, tender piece of the roasted beef. He held the fork to her lips. In werewolf culture, for an alpha to feed another wolf from his own plate was an act of extreme intimacy. It was a declaration of absolute provision and protection. Lisa's breath hitched. She leaned forward, parting her lips, and took the meat. The taste was a revelation, rich, savory, and bursting with life. She closed her eyes, a small, involuntary moan escaping her throat. It was the most exquisite thing she had ever tasted. David watched her, his pupils dilating until his eyes were almost entirely black. The mating bond, fed by this act of primal provision, flared between them like a roaring fire. He fed her another bite, then another, pacing her, grounding her, until the frantic, feral edge of her hunger subsided into a deep, satisfying warmth. When she finally pushed the plate away, thoroughly full for the first time in weeks, David set the silverware down. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly register, "the royal tribunal convenes. Thorn and Clara will be brought before the council." Lisa's posture stiffened. The warmth of the meal was instantly replaced by a cold, hard knot in her chest. "I want to be there," she said. Her voice didn't shake. David studied her face, searching for any sign of fragility. He found only polished steel. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her newly recovered jaw. "It will be a spectacle," he warned her. "The council will be watching you. They will judge you. They will try to find weakness." "Let them look," Lisa replied, her amber eyes burning with a fierce, steady light. "I survived Alpha Thorn. I can survive your council." A slow, dangerous smile spread across the Alpha King's face. It was the smile of a conqueror who had just found his queen. "You will not just survive them," David promised, leaning in to press a fierce, searing kiss to her forehead. "You will rule them. Tomorrow, they see exactly who you are." The great hall of the citadel was an amphitheater of black basalt and polished obsidian. Tiered seating curved around a sunken central floor, filled with the murmuring elders of the royal council and the alphas of neighboring territories. In the center of the pit, shackled at the wrists and ankles with heavy, silver-lined iron, stood Thorn and Clara. They looked a far cry from the polished aristocrats who had attended the mating ball. Thorn's velvet suit was rumpled and stained with the damp of the dungeons, his face pale and unshaven. Clara was sobbing quietly, her once immaculate hair hanging in greasy tangles around her face. A heavy, resounding gong silenced the room. "All rise for His Majesty, King David of the Iron Peak, Sovereign of the United Pax," the royal herald bellowed. The heavy doors at the top of the dais swung open. The room rose in unison, heads bowed in respect. David strode into the room, draped in a magnificent cloak of black fur over his formal charcoal suit. But it was not the king who drew the collective gasp from the assembly. It was the woman walking beside him. Lisa did not walk behind the king, nor did she trail submissively in his shadow. She walked shoulder to shoulder with him. She was dressed in a gown of deep, royal crimson, a stark contrast to the sickly, oversized emerald rags she had worn at the ball. The dress fit her recovering curves perfectly, and her dark hair was swept up into a severe, elegant braid. She looked like a blade drawn from its sheath. David reached the twin obsidian thrones at the center of the dais. He did not sit. Instead, he turned and held out his hand to Lisa, guiding her to stand directly in front of his throne. The political implication was deafening. Thorn looked up from the pit, his eyes widening in horror as he recognized the radiant, powerful woman standing beside the king. "Treason!" David's voice boomed, echoing off the basalt walls without him even raising his voice. Embezzlement of crown resources, and the attempted murder of an innocent pack member to cover the tracks. David looked down at Thorn. "The evidence is absolute. The auditors found the smelting equipment. We traced the offshore accounts. You stole from your people, and you stole from the crown to feed your own pathetic vices. My king, please." Thorn dropped to his knees, the chains rattling loudly. "The winter was harsh. I made mistakes, yes, but I am a sovereign alpha. I demand the right of combat." "You demand nothing," David snarled, his aura flaring so violently that several council members in the front row flinched. "You lost your honor the moment you locked a starving woman in a cellar to hide your cowardice. The crown strips you of your title, your lands, and your wealth." Clara screamed, dropping to the floor beside her father. "Please, I didn't know. He made me do it. Lisa, please." She looked up at the dais, her face twisted in pathetic desperation. Tell them I was just following orders. We are sisters." Lisa looked down at the weeping girl. She felt no pity. She felt no anger. She only felt the cold, hard certainty of justice. David turned to Lisa, the fury on his face instantly melting into a look of absolute respect. He stepped back, leaving her at the very edge of the dais, the focal point of the entire hall. "The crimes against the crown have been judged," David announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "But the crimes against this woman are hers to judge. Step forward, Lisa of the Crescent Moon. Speak your sentence." A shocked murmur rippled through the council. For a king to defer judgment to an unranked female was unheard of. Lisa stepped forward, gripping the stone railing. She looked down at Thorn, who was staring at her with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "You taught me that strength is the only currency that matters," Lisa said, her voice clear, steady, and ringing with authority. "You thought that by starving me, you would break me. You thought I would fade away in the dark." She raised her chin, her amber eyes glowing with the fierce light of her wolf. "But you only burned away the weakness," Lisa continued. "I sentence you, Thorn, and you, Clara, to the deep basalt mines of the northern crags. You will spend the rest of your natural lives digging the silver you so desperately love out of the rock with your bare hands. You will eat only what you earn, and you will live in the dark you tried to bury me in." The absolute silence in the room was shattered by Thorn's furious, despairing roar. He lunged toward the dais, but the guards instantly dragged him down, the silver chains burning into his skin. "You are nothing!" Thorn screamed as he was dragged backward toward the heavy iron doors. "You are an orphan, a stray. You have no pack." Lisa didn't even flinch. She watched him go with cold detachment. Suddenly, David stepped up behind her. He didn't care about the watching council. He didn't care about royal decorum. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, and buried his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled her scent deeply, letting his own dominant aura wash over the entire room, intertwining with hers. "She is no stray," the Alpha King declared, his voice a lethal, vibrating growl that sent shivers down the spine of every wolf in the citadel. "She is my mate. She is your queen, and the next person who disrespects her will answer to my claws." The heavy doors slammed shut behind Thorn and Clara, sealing their fate. Lisa leaned back against David's solid chest, the warmth of his body seeping into her bones. The nightmare was truly over. She had walked into the mating ball, a starved prisoner. She was walking out the ruler of the realm. A month passed, and the citadel transformed from a fortress of cold obsidian into a home. The winter snows began to melt, giving way to the fragile green shoots of early spring. Lisa's physical recovery was complete. The hollows of her cheeks were gone, replaced by a radiant, healthy flush. Her amber eyes, once haunted by the shadows of a lightless cellar, now held the bright, steady fire of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. She stood on the grand balcony of the king's private chambers, the midnight wind whipping her dark hair around her face. She wore a simple dress of midnight blue silk, a silver chain resting against her collarbone, a gift from David, forged without a single trace of crescent moon silver. Below her, the vast expanse of the United Territories stretched out beneath a canopy of brilliant stars. It was a kingdom that now belonged to her as much as it did to him. The heavy glass doors slid open behind her. She didn't need to turn around. The scent of rain, ozone, and cedarwood instantly enveloped her, settling her wolf and warming her blood. David stepped onto the balcony, shedding his formal suit jacket and tossing it over a wrought iron chair. He walked up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and pulling her back against his solid chest. Lisa let out a soft sigh, leaning her head back onto his shoulder. "The council meetings went late," Lisa murmured, her hands coming up to rest over his where they were clasped at her stomach. "They were arguing over trade routes in the eastern valleys," David replied, pressing a lingering kiss to the side of her neck. "I told them if they didn't reach a consensus by midnight, I was going to let you negotiate the tariffs. They settled it in 10 minutes. Lisa let out a quiet, genuine laugh. It was a sound that still brought a fierce surge of protective pride to David's chest every time he heard it. The council had quickly learned that their new queen was not just a survivor. She was a brilliant, unyielding strategist who could see through political bluster with terrifying clarity. "They fear you," David said softly, turning her in his arms so she faced him. "But they also revere you. You sent the spring grain surplus to the poorer fringe packs yesterday without asking my permission." "They were starving," Lisa said, her smile fading into something much more solemn. Her amber eyes met his stormy gray ones. "I know what that feels like, David. I know the exact arithmetic of counting days without a meal. I will not allow a single wolf in our kingdom to learn that math." David reached up, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. The absolute adoration in his eyes was blinding. "When I saw you on that ballroom floor," David whispered, the memory still casting a dark shadow over his features, "I thought the world had finally broken you. I thought the cruelty of men like Thorn had won." "It almost did," Lisa admitted, stepping closer and resting her palms flat against his chest, feeling the steady, powerful thumping of his heart. "For a long time, I thought survival meant becoming as hard and cold as the stone I slept on. I thought if I cared about nothing, they couldn't take anything away from me." "And now?" he asked, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that sent pleasant shivers down her spine. "Now," Lisa said, rising slightly on her tiptoes, "I know that true strength isn't turning to ice. It's having the courage to remain soft, to remain compassionate. When the world demands you become a monster. You taught me that. You are the most feared alpha in a century, yet you fed me ice chips from a plastic cup so I wouldn't bleed." David groaned softly, his control slipping. He tangled his hands in her dark hair, tilting her face up to his. "You are my anchor, Lisa," he murmured against her lips. "You are the only thing in this world that makes the crown bearable." He kissed her, and this time there was no holding back, no pacing for a fragile patient. It was a kiss that possessed the devastating power of the storm he smelled of. Deep, demanding, and utterly consuming. Lisa met his passion with her own, her arms wrapping tightly around his neck. The mating bond, fully realized and accepted, flared between them, a golden thread of pure magic that wove their souls together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily, their foreheads rested against one another. "Mark me," Lisa whispered, baring her neck to him, offering him the ultimate, irrevocable trust of a wolf. "Claim me, David. Be my pack." David's eyes darkened, his wolf surging to the surface in response to his mate's absolute surrender. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent of pine and frost. With a reverent, agonizingly tender slowness, his teeth grazed her skin, finding the pulse point. He bit down, sealing the bond. A rush of warmth flooded Lisa's veins, washing away the last lingering ghosts of the cellar, the starvation, and the cold. She was no longer an orphan. She was no longer a stray. She was Lisa of the Iron Peak, queen of the United Packs. And she was finally, perfectly whole. As they stood together on the balcony, watching the dawn begin to paint the horizon in shades of gold and crimson, they knew whatever storms came next, they would face them together. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey of resilience, justice, and fated love. Lisa's story proves that the darkest nights only forge the strongest queens, and that true power lies not in cruelty, but in unyielding compassion. If you felt the emotional tension of Lisa's survival and cheered for King David's righteous fury, please take a moment to like this story and share it with your fellow romance and fantasy fiction lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more cinematic, high-stakes alpha romance stories, unpredictable twists, and epic happily ever afters. Drop a comment below to let us know which moment was your favorite. We love hearing from you.